That's show-starting music, to say the least. Welcome to OverDrive. Jim Tatti, Frankie Corrado, and Al's brother, Mike DiStefano, here manning the boat for the boys who are off this week. So as we launch into another show, I did some ciphering this morning, and lo and behold, this morning, as AB and I were talking before we went on the air, Paul Fisher and a 2028 third-round pick mysteriously go from St. Louis to Edmonton for future considerations after the Oilers said we're not going to match either one of those deals. And what you're left with is Columbus has about 7.3 extra to spend. Montreal's 1.1 over. Edmonton has minimal cap space until they do something with Evander Kane's salary. And St. Louis has some cap space. What does all this mean?
I don't even know what the hell you just said. You want to start over again?
Yeah, so,
you just threw a million numbers at me right off the top.
So obviously, Edmonton got some sort of payoff, or well, I don't know how you want to say that.
Yeah, there was a little.
That was interesting.
There was a kicker.
It was one of these.
But is that skirting the rules, though, Frankie? Isn't that? I mean, like that is not supposed to be how compensation works when it comes to RFAs. When it comes to the offer sheet, right?
It's a negotiation, man. It's like,
is it
listen,
though?
Okay, we'll match it. If you don't want us to match it, throw in a little kicker for us. Like they're already kind of. Like it's the offer sheet. It's a little bit of the wild west when it comes to it. St. Louis opened them, like they did it. They started it. So I don't blame Edmonton for saying, okay, you don't want us to match? Throw us a little bone here. There you go.
But like, if you're Edmonton, if you're already not matching, I mean, like St. Louis, I think did them a solid. I don't think St. Louis didn't have to do this trade. Either way, it seemed like Edmonton was not matching. I don't think that extra third-round pick and this prospect, this unsigned, undrafted prospect, is, you know, the kicker that's going to make Edmonton, okay, we're not going to bring back Holloway and Broberg, two guys who we've invested in, two first-round picks that we've had over the last couple of years. Like, it's a really intriguing situation, and it's definitely an eyebrow raiser. I don't know. I just looked at it this morning. I'm like, St. Louis did not have to do that. I don't think they had to.
They didn't have to, but then you basically are asking the Oilers to call your bluff. And if the Oilers say, okay, we'll find a way to match, then what do you do if you're St. Louis? You missed out on two guys that you probably wanted.
I guess. So for their case, like whatever, that's already a steal. Getting Holloway and Broberg for a 2 and a 3 is already a really good deal. Now, you're paying a lot for them.
That's what I was going to say.
You are paying a lot
Prices.
for them. But in terms of what it cost you, like asset-wise, it's not a whole lot. Now you can make the argument, yes, the asset of cap space is considerable, especially in the modern NHL. But they got a lot of it anyway. And it's a team that's kind of going through a bit of a retool. Not a rebuild, but a retool in a way. They're trying to get younger, more skilled. And these two young players, they obviously believe are going to grow into those contracts. Are they worth that today? Probably not. But will they grow into it? They're banking on yes.
They are. In the immediate, right now, like I don't see the St. Louis Blues turning into this, I don't know, contender. They might make the playoffs, but it doesn't help the St. Louis Blues that much right now, just as much as it doesn't hurt the Edmonton Oilers that much right now. Like this is a future play. If Dylan Holloway turns into a point getter in the top 6 and Philip Broberg turns into a minute-munching defenseman who plays 20 minutes a night, gives you 40 points a year, then that'll be a big loss for Edmonton down the road. I don't think it changes much as far as playoff chances for Edmonton and what St. Louis looks like this year right now. I don't know if you feel any different.
Are you surprised, though, that they didn't make this, that they didn't match either offer sheet? I personally thought that they're going to match one of them. And after they had made the CC trade, I thought that kind of spoke, okay, we're probably going to bring back Broberg, and he could fill in that void. And then they made the Podkolzin deal to replace Holloway. And then all of a sudden you wake up this morning and it's, actually, we're not going to retain either of these guys. It kind of did surprise me.
A little bit surprising, but I guess, you know, we've kind of seen it time and time again. What's the number one asset that teams want, that the teams prioritize more than player development is cap space. And when you're a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup right now, like the Edmonton Oilers are, tying yourself to Philip Broberg with $4.6 million doesn't help you at the trade deadline, doesn't help you get the Evan Bouchard deal done, the Leon Draisaitl deal done. What they've done basically is moved enough money off the books in CC, in Holloway and Broberg, and you get a cheaper replacement in Podkolzin. That blue line's going to look different at some point. I wouldn't even be surprised if they made a change to that blue line before the season even started. Like that doesn't exactly scream Stanley Cup blue line. So they've just basically given themselves more options and alleviated some of the cap stress that they may have had if they signed Holloway at 2.29 and Broberg at 4.6. Broberg's not a $4.6 million defenseman today.
No.
He might be soon, but today he's not.
And that's where they are. They want to win a Stanley Cup, so it's not a player development routine for them. They're looking for a specific piece. They're going to ride Nurse, Ekholm, and Bouchard, give them more minutes, and hopefully they get more production and fill in around those guys. I thought when I woke up this morning, you may disagree with me, Columbus now with inheriting an extra 7.3 is actually noteworthy just because they can do something. They don't have that contract anymore.
They're so far away, and they have all these young guys that are going to be coming up and some guys that are going to have to get paid at some point. Like, there's so many things that need to go right for Columbus in order for them to start challenging for a playoff spot. I think, like we talked about Laine yesterday, I still can't find any downside to that trade for the Montreal Canadiens.
For the Habs,
you bring in a second,
yeah.
You moved a defenseman who's a good defenseman, but there was a logjam on that blue line anyways. Yeah. And now it's like a 2-year window to say to Patrik Laine, can you show us that you can be a part of this thing moving forward, or the money's coming off the books in 2 years for him, Gallagher, Anderson, Armia 1 year. It's like there's a 2-year window here before they really start to make some noise.
Well, and for a while, it seems like the Montreal Canadiens, last 2 years, we've heard them talk about how they wanted to be players. They wanted to start adding some guys in. There was, thoughts that they were interested in bringing in a Steven Stamkos. And they've always looked for a big-time goal scorer to go along with Cole Caulfield. So they found that, and they've been looking to make a splash. And whatever you think of Patrik Laine, can he get back to being the 30, 40 goal scorer that he was earlier in his career? They're obviously banking on that happening. He himself today was speaking with media. He thinks he could be a 40 to 50 goal guy. So, I do like the bet from Montreal's perspective. I think it makes them better. I do question, though, because yesterday I was listening to the show. Great show, fellas. But you kept talking.
Someone finally said it.
Yeah, that's right.
But, Frank, you kept saying that you don't think that there's much pressure for Patrik Laine. It's a no downside for him from that perspective. Don't you think adding in Laine, though, moves the needle a little bit for Montreal, where that may put them, not necessarily accelerate it into a contender status, but I think, there's going to be a little bit more expectation on that team now that they've added a premier goal-scoring threat to go with that nucleus.
The expectation is probably not going to be to make the playoffs, but it's to be better than a bottom 5 team in the league. And that probably would have been the case this year without Patrik Laine, because in theory, you were going to get a healthy Kirby Dach, which I think a lot of Patrik Laine's success this year is going to be predicated on, is Kirby Dach healthy? And what does that look like? Because chances are he's playing on that line, that second line. So you need Dach healthy. You need to know what he is. You need Patrik Laine to stay healthy to know if he can be a part of things for the future.
And Newhook. All three of them have spent a lot of time on the shelf the last couple of years.
And I guess, when you're talking about the expectation is probably not the playoffs, but the expectation is to be competitive every night, win some games maybe now that you're not supposed to win, and make sure that you're a harder out and show that, in 2-3 years' time when the team is ready to kind of take the step, the decor's gotten better. The superstars are superstars now, and there's some depth pieces, which they probably still lack some of those depth pieces, but at least they're putting the talent up front in place to make that happen in a couple of years' time.
Coming up in our next segment, which will be in minutes from now, Ryan Rishaug will stop by and go over the Oilers part of what happened today with the no matching offers by Edmonton on the St. Louis offers to Broberg and Holloway. In the meantime, we've got Stan Bowman here, the general manager of the Oilers, talking about having to separate business and personal.
You have to separate business and personal. I've known Doug Armstrong a long time. We had a lot of battles over the years when I was in Chicago, and he's still in St. Louis. So, I don't look at it that way. I understand that this is a possibility for every manager to use, and now it's our job to react to it and do what's best for us. So, I think you can't let your personal feelings get in the way of anything like that. We have to have a working relationship with all the managers in the league, and I can intend to do that moving forward.
Stan Bowman wrapping up the situation. We'll continue on with this. Ryan Rishaug is next. Later on, confirm or deny at 5. At 5:30, Steve Phillips will stop by. At 6:05, Kenzie Lalonde talking about the Habs, part of that Laine deal yesterday, and Mark Cicchino at 6:30. So Overdrive continues on TSN 4, TSN 1050, the iHeartRadio app, and also streaming online. Overdrive on a Tuesday. Jim Tatti, Frank Corrado, and Mike DiStefano, a.k.a. Al's brother, with you, expecting to hook up with Ryan Rishaug very shortly. And he can give us the pecking order on the story. They don't match the offer sheets. Weirdo acquisition right after. And then all of a sudden you've got one, maybe two holes in the blue line that got also close to a Stanley Cup. So, what is the more prominent part of that?
The blue line. The blue line's always been a work in progress for Edmonton. And you can go back to when Clefbaum got hurt and he actually just announced his retirement.
Yep.
Adam Larson left for nothing. That was your first pair. So go around the league and take away your number one right shot, your number one left shot. See what that does to your blue line. That's a big hit. And they've always had to be putting the pieces together. And they've done a pretty good job. Like, they're one win away from a Stanley Cup. Matthias Ekholm coming in was a big part of that. Evan Bouchard's progression is a big part of that. But now the blue line still remains under construction without Philip Broberg and Cody Ceci, I guess.
All right, let's bring in Ryan Rishaug now. Ryan, welcome. How are you today, sir?
Doing good, yeah. Ended up being, I guess we always knew Tuesday was going to be the busy day with them matching. But, yep, lots on the go, man. Oiler Nation is going a little berserk out here. You lose two players like that, and fans do not like the way that feels.
Well, and throw in Cody Ceci. So, how much concern is there about that blue line? How do they move forward?
Well, there should be concern. I mean, major concern. They're not nearly as good as they were, in the playoffs. Cody Ceci was 20 minutes a night. Philip Broberg stepped in and played the best hockey of his life on the biggest stage and showed to a lot of people that he was ready to be in the NHL and, quite frankly, probably already should have been. So you subtract those two players and, it's going to be a, 2 or 3 horse race for second pairing right side on this team between three guys you could argue are all 6s and 7s. So, I mean, it's not good enough. And that's going to be Stan Bowman's challenge here, is to figure out a way to piece together a good enough blue line that this team can compete for a division and a conference and be one of the better teams in the league like people expect them to be this year, not let this be too big a step back.
What's your sense on why the Edmonton Oilers did not choose to match on Holloway and Broberg?
This is all about the cap. Had they matched, they would have been in a tough spot because, if Evander Kane goes to LTIR and they move enough pieces around that they match and they keep both these players, they'd have been in cap hell. And then when Evander Kane was ready to come back, everybody in the world would have known the Oilers need to move $3-4 million here, and it would have been a nightmare trying to make a trade to clear up that space to make everything fit and everything work. So at a time when they should have been trying to bolster their lineup, they would have been looking, dealing from a position of weakness. This was all about cap management for this upcoming season, but the subsequent years, with Draisaitl, if they get him done, his new contract, McDavid's eventually, this was all about the salary cap. And so while I understand that logic and while I understand why they had to do what they had to do, bigger picture, I think the bigger storyline here is that the Edmonton Oilers didn't do a good enough job managing two of the organization's most important young players by having a development plan clearly in place, by having a succession plan where they were able to take over clear spots in the lineup, do contracts that were multi-years in length that sent a signal to these guys that they were a part of it. Instead, Philip Broberg asked for a trade last season. He was so tired of the way he was being handled. I think I just don't think a great job was done of making sure that these players were prioritized, worked in, made part of it so that they were part of it moving forward and contracts firmly in place with that in mind. They ended up squeezing them in the entry-level system and as a result losing them.
So, Ryan, they moved out from Cody Ceci, which originally I thought was maybe a way to create cap space to bring back one of these two guys, but now they've lost 3 players on their roster who played minutes for them on their Stanley Cup final run. Are there internal replacements for these guys, or do you expect maybe another move or two to be done before training camp?
Well, I mean, I could see maybe another defenseman being brought in to compete on the right side. Like right now, I mean, the top pairing is Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard. Then you've got Darnell Nurse on left, and you've got Brett Kulak on left, and kind of a jump ball on the right side. I mean, Troy Stetcher is going to have a chance to compete for minutes in the top four. I mean, this player they brought in from San Jose, played a decent number of minutes last year. Ty did, and he, I think there's hope that he can come in and push for minutes, but I mean, I don't count top four defensemen. They're definitely short quality defensemen, and on a team with Stanley Cup aspirations, that's how they'll start the year, but it can't be how they finish the year, right? So they'll have some internal competition, but I think everybody knows these players are what they are. Someone's going to have to dramatically outkick their coverage to earn that spot and keep it for the year.
I want to go back to Broberg. I agree with you what you said. I mean, obviously it's about managing an asset, but when you're one win away from winning a Stanley Cup, I mean, it's all about going for it. This is not player development time.
No, yeah, I agree with that. It's not player development time, but what I would say is that the Oilers had plenty of opportunity to walk and chew gum at the same time, which means, yes, you have expectations of winning during the regular season, but as a general manager and a head coach, you have to also be able to agree on how to work in young, important players, give them minutes, give them opportunity, not bench them when they make a mistake, not let them go weeks and weeks without playing. Good organizations can be good in the moment, but also have a clear development plan for their most important young players. And I think that's where the Oilers dropped the ball here, in particular on Broberg. So, I agree with you. And when you're one win away, sometimes it can be hard for young players to get into the lineup. But, Jim, you watched the Stanley Cup final. How did you think Philip Broberg looked? I thought he looked fantastic.
Yeah.
So did that just come out of nowhere? Like that, they've had that player for a while. But wound up in a position where the player was frustrated and wanted out because of the way he was being handled. And so, now they are where they are. The St. Louis Blues are in a position to make a bet on a guy, to say, we know you might not be worth that today, but we think you might be tomorrow, so we can take that chance. The Oilers are cash strapped. They can't make that same bet.
So now they have some money that's going to be coming on the books. And what I mean by that is, you talked about it, the Bouchard deal has to get done at some point. Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, like there's a lot of money that's going to be tied up with those players. And you can have Bouchard making a lot of money. You can have Darnell Nurse making 9.25, and you can have another defenseman who makes 4.6 million. But do you think that other defenseman who makes 4.6 you have to have a little more reassurance as far as what they are, and you don't necessarily have that in Philip Broberg just yet?
Yeah, it's a fair point. You look at his body of work and you say, can you guarantee this is going to be a number 3 or 4 defenseman, and in the next 2 or 3 years? And I think that's up for debate. What I would say is what I saw in the Stanley Cup final was a guy who stepped in almost out of nowhere and was, I don't know, their third best defenseman, maybe their fourth best defenseman. He was excellent in that final when he got his minutes. He showed he can skate unbelievably well at that level when the game is as fast as it's ever going to be. He showed them a lot. I feel Philip Broberg will turn into a top 4 defenseman and possibly as soon as late next season. So I would have been comfortable placing a bet on Philip Broberg. But the Oilers just weren't in position to do that given their cap situation. I mean, they just weren't. So, Cody Ceci goes out. They were going to have to make a trade like that anyways this summer, guys. They were already strapped against the cap because all the forwards that they were able to re-sign, something had to give. And, at the end of the day, with Philip Broberg, he had shown he could do it on the biggest stage, but tough for the Oilers to put that dollar figure on that player, right? They were trying to use the system to their advantage, right? The offer they had on the table to Broberg was 2 times 1.1. He just signed for 4.6 almost.
But that's a show me deal. That is a prove it to us, show me deal for an RFA. You guys, you don't get to play show me deals at $4.6 million. Not a lot of guys get to be in the stage of proving themselves at, just under $5 million.
Well, and I mean, look at what Darren Ferris did for his player here. I mean, he went from negotiating with the Oilers at $2.2 million to now this $9 million. I mean, he got his guy paid, flat out. This was a fantastic deal for Darren Ferris and Philip Broberg. And Dylan Holloway made out fine as well. I think the offer was, 3 years in and around the $1 million range. So the Oilers were trying to use the entry-level system to squeeze some young players, to fit them in under the cap, to be competitive. And that's what competitive teams have to do sometimes. But they were exposed. This was incredibly coordinated, shrewd. This wouldn't have worked if it were just one. This had to be both. So for one team to offer sheet 2 players with 2 different agents and coordinated at dollar figures that they knew would be just out of reach, man, this was ninja-like stuff from the agents and from the Blues, and it worked. And by the way, and I chatted with Darren Ferris today, there were a couple of other teams ready to do this. This was not just the St. Louis Blues. This was happening either way. And quite frankly, whether Ken Holland was the general manager or not, this was happening.
Interesting. So do you expect to maybe the NHL GMs are finally ready to use this? Like, this has been a tool that could be used for many years, and for whatever reason, GMs have shied away from it. Do you think we've gotten to a point now league-wide where GMs are going to start doing this more often, considering really how well it kind of worked out for the St. Louis Blues?
Yeah, well, Doug Armstrong's willing to do it. Honestly, I think teams are willing to do it. I don't think that the same taboo that we all think exists out there, this handshake deal and let's not do that to one another. I think there are holes in, I don't think it's always the smartest thing to do. And traditionally, it hasn't exactly worked out like gangbusters for the teams that have done it, right? I don't think there's this grand hesitation. I just think at the end of the day, when these teams get together and sit down and go through the logic of it, more often than not, it ends up not really making sense, because what you're essentially doing is you're giving up an asset and overpaying a young player to come in and, probably play as well or better than they've ever played before. So you're placing a bet on a player that wasn't yours, wasn't your draft pick. I just don't know that it's always made a tremendous amount of sense. So I think GMs have always been willing to do this. I just don't think it often makes sense the way it did this time. This lined up perfectly, you guys. They're potentially overpaying Broberg here. That's the risk. Holloway will probably be fine at that number. This makes hockey sense for the St. Louis Blues to do, given where they're at. I think the stars aligned, and this happened. And I do think there's a willingness out there from others to do it. It just doesn't always make sense.
If you look at the salary list, really what they've done is added Arvidsson and Skinner, deleted 2 defensemen with the hope of at some point they add another defenseman. This is, if they find that right defenseman, this is a much better, deeper team, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I said after free agency, the Oilers are better now than they were in the Stanley Cup final. They actually improved themselves. They added Arvidsson, they added Skinner, another year, more experience for Broberg, experience for Holloway, some internal growth there, Stanley Cup final experience for the whole group. Jeff Jackson had a fantastic... The fact that they were able to return that entire third line, Matthias Janmark, Adam Henrique, and Connor Brown, and they did it at the dollar figure that they did, that in itself, if you guys remember how good that third line was for them when it mattered the most. So, yeah, the Oilers were a better team heading into this season coming up than they were in the Cup final, and then this happened. Now, they've maneuvered. Vasily Podkolzin will come in, and he'll compete for similar opportunity to what Dylan Holloway was going to be given. We'll see how he does with it. We'll see. Emerson on the blue line, same thing. He'll compete for minutes over there. But it's a downgrade at both positions, no question.
So we saw it on July 1st. A lot of people want to be Edmonton Oilers, and there's players that are willing to take discounts to come to Edmonton based on the fact that you have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. You're going to hitch your wagon to Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in their prime, poised to win a Stanley Cup. Now, as we go into the season, we approach the trade deadline. We've seen it happen with Florida. We saw it with Claude Giroux. We saw it with Vlad Tarasenko, where they have some, no move protection. And they say, please, can you move me to the Florida Panthers? I'd like to go play there. And yes, it's a sexy location. The weather's great, all that kind of stuff. Do you see a situation where, because Edmonton, is such a strong team, and it seems like McDavid is going to win a Stanley Cup at some point, do you think players call their agents and say, just find a way to get me to Edmonton at the trade deadline?
Yes. It's already been happening. It already happened. In free agency, my belief is Arvidsson had his eyes on one spot. I have heard stories, nothing I'm going to report here in the moment, but it's already happening. Players want to be here because they sense this team is close, and they want to do that. Adam Henrique, there would have been more money on the table elsewhere for Adam Henrique, no question. Even at the trade deadline, Adam Henrique It's a sought-after destination because of that. Corey Perry, signed here for that reason too. So it's very different than it had been in the past, guys. Very different. But I do think that it's a destination and players sense that this team is close, and the Oilers are benefiting from that. You look at these deals that they did. Clearly, they've got guys in for less money because they felt that they were in a Stanley Cup window. So now the big question is, what's Leon's number? That's the big question now for Stan Bowman to try and figure out.
Well, that is kind of the next question that I was going to get to here. I mean, obviously, that had to weigh into their decision not to lock up those, those dollars for the next couple of seasons, knowing that he's going to need a big deal. How comfortable are the Oilers going into the season without one, or are they going to try and get something done before training camp?
Well, they're trying to get something done right now, and Stan Bowman was fairly tight-lipped about where things are at. You do not want to walk Leon Draisaitl into the final year of his deal. You want no part of that at all. So I believe they're going to exhaust every option to try and get it done. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. The general feeling out there seems to be that Leon enjoys playing in Edmonton and would be open to doing an 8-year deal here. And it just comes down to the number, right? What's the number? Two questions. What's the number? And what's the gap between him and Connor McDavid on McDavid's next deal? I believe the days of there being a $4 million gap between these two players are long gone. Long gone. So if you're Draisaitl right now and you're negotiating and McDavid can't until next summer, you want to have a sense of what this whole thing is going to look like, right? What does it look like? The Oilers will want to look at Nathan McKinnon on his deal. Some will point to Austin Matthews at his deal. Austin Matthews was a shorter deal. I believe if this is in the 13s, it's because Leon Draisaitl has said, I am willing to cut this way back so that we have a better chance of winning. To me, this deal lives in the 14s all day long.
Wow. Lofty. Ryan, thanks very much.
Okay, guys. Enjoyed chatting with you. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you. You too. Ryan Rishaug reporting to us from Edmonton, TSN Edmonton Oilers reporter. Obviously this is a team that's so close to a Stanley Cup. They've got cap problems like everybody does. And the way I look at this is the Broberg thing is fine, but doesn't fit here. It's a no-fly zone.
Not at that price. It's not at that price.
But it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee of what he is yet. And in the future, he may turn into that guy. And he might be a $4 or $5 million defenseman. But right now, if you go around the league and you look at defensemen that make that much money, I'm not sure.
Making more than Chris Tanev this year.
Making more than Chris Tanev. Use his comparables. Guys that he's kind of in the same category. Sandin, Liljegren. Who else would you put in that category?
Is he even in that category? We're talking about a guy the last couple of years, realistically, has spent a bulk of his time in the American Hockey League.
Yeah, something like 59 games in the American League last year.
Last year, he didn't. His bulk of games came in the playoffs. Now, played really, really well.
That's great, but do it for 82. Do it for an 82-game grind, and then do it again in the playoffs.
Which is why I don't blame the Oilers for wanting to play hardball and not offer him up, the $4 million. And look, that is a monstrous contract for him. And it's unfair to say he hasn't earned it, but that's not what his market value is. I think, even he would probably agree with you, or his agent would. But guess what?
His agent did a great job.
But that's what they had to get to in order to make the Oilers balk, right?
Absolutely.
And it worked out. And the St. Louis Blues, they could afford it because they got all this cap space to spend.
And you can look at the original Oilers offers and say they're really low, but that's what it takes to fit into this, to make this a Stanley Cup team. And if you don't fit in, you're out. I mean, it's that simple.
Was coming off his ELC, and I think coming off, to your point, Liljegren signed what, 1.4 off his ELC?
That's what it is. That's usually the deal that these guys get when you've spent time in the minors. But I do part of me, actually a lot of me really appreciates the fact that teams are willing to do this and help players out of a jam, because we talked about it yesterday. You don't have arbitration rights. You're kind of dealing with one team, and that team can basically say, take the qualifying offer, or we'll throw you a little bit of a saving grace here. We'll give you a 2-year deal at 1.5 per year and show us something. Whereas now this team stepped in and said, actually, we'll take this guy. And yeah, it's got to be for a lot more money, but they obviously see something and they believe in him. And now it's a little bit of a cautionary tale, I think, to teams that want to jam qualifying offers down players' throats and say, you might want to take care of business before it gets to this.
Let's get this signed. Let's get this signed, sealed, and delivered. Because
Tempt them. Throw them an offer during the season that maybe they don't want to turn down.
You don't have a huge gap between what you're actually offering and what he's going to get. I mean, that's a ridiculous gap.
Yeah, that was never going to be on the table from the Oilers.
No,
Never.
but
Not
at
in a
least
million years.
But the offer was low enough to instigate what happened.
The Oilers deal that was on the table was actually quite fair, to be honest with you. It's just like if St. Louis, for Broberg, if St. Louis wasn't willing to do this, and Rishaug said that there were other teams, maybe there was. Maybe that's the agent just kind of putting that out there just to, take some of the, take St. Louis out of the fire.
I don't think there would have been many that were willing to go 4.5.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm still not sold. I'll believe that.
But
when
like 2.53.
Well,
you
you find a team that has to spend to get to the floor, and they would spend 4.5 on Broberg every day.
Sure.
So I mean, one of the narratives is, would Doug Armstrong, general manager of the Blues, do this if Ken Holland was still the general manager? So this is Doug Armstrong on how far he'd go on an offer sheet.
I think it was reported that I wouldn't have done this to Kenny Holland. That's the truth. Quite honestly, I'd do it to my mother if she was managing the Oilers. My job is to take care of the St. Louis Blues fans and the St. Louis Blues organization, and we saw an opportunity to do that.
Well, I mean, but that's when you're a general manager. What are you entrusted to do? Whatever in the best interests of the franchise.
Dude, there's not for a second do I believe that he would do that to his good buddy Kenny Holland. No way.
You don't think?
I don't think he would do that to him. But maybe, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have got to that point if Ken Holland was still the GM of the Oilers. Like, who knows, the inner workings of this and how it got to this point. But all I can say is, from what we know, the offers that the Oilers made both those players, Broberg and Holloway, those are pretty fair offers. I don't think they were really trying to jam those guys up too much. But they had the lifeline in St. Louis. St. Louis had the money, and St. Louis made it work. But, I don't think there was any malintent by Edmonton to really jam something that's unfair to these guys.
So if you're Jeff Jackson and you're hiring or you're auditioning people to become the new general manager of your hockey team, one of the first questions you might ask would be, what are you going to do with Draisaitl? How are we going to do this? Because this is a key piece. So give me your answer to that. And once I get the answer to that, then you have to say, what are we going to do with the rest of it? Because it doesn't match, because you have to do this to keep Draisaitl, and then you just draw a line and go, well, this guy has to make this, this guy has to make that, and if they don't, they're out. It's that simple, isn't it?
And the thing with Stan Bowman is he's had to make those decisions before, right? He had to make those decisions in Chicago, right? Once they signed Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, you saw the amount of players after they won their cups. It was like half the team had to go out the door. Chris Versteeg, nice seeing you. Goodbye, right? Like every single year. Dustin
Ladd,
Byfuglien, Andrew Ladd.
Sharp eventually
You were great,
went.
right?
Yeah.
Eventually.
Some of them came back.
5 guys that
Aravinen.
basically stuck around, right? It was Kane, Taves, Keith Seabrook, Hossa.
Basically. And I guess they finally stuck with Corey Crawford as the goaltender.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was a carousel there that just rotated right out, and some of them came back years later.
Yeah. But there is a model that he has worked with before where he's been able to pay 2 guys the most money out of anyone in the league. Because at the time, I believe those are the highest contracts in the league.
It was like $10.5 million.
And that was unheard of in hockey to be paid that much. So, there's a formula that he knows, right? He's done it before. So, that's the experience that I'm sure Jeff Jackson wanted. And knowing that that's going to kind of be a situation here in Edmonton, I'm sure that helped Stan Bowman land the job.
The Draisaitl thing is very simple. You go to him and you say, how much money do you want to make?
Yeah, what do you need?
And pretty much you're going to have to come close to what he wants to make. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know what kind of negotiation you're having there. You want the guy to stick around. You want him to be an Oiler for a long time.
Got to make him happy.
You're going to have to make him happy, and you're going to have to pay him a lot of money. It's pretty
fathom.
simple. And I don't think he's going to ask for something outrageous. I think he's going to be fair to the team, understanding that Bouchard needs money, McDavid needs money, and yes, you need a team around these guys if you want to win a Stanley Cup, if you're serious about winning a Stanley Cup.
And so when does that happen? Sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks?
You would hope.
Like next week?
You would hope.
Well,
But on the other side of the coin.
But if we've mapped it out the way you said, and he's got, and the way we were talking about, where he's got this plan, it's going to happen fast, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. They want it to happen fast, and there's no reason why it shouldn't, realistically. If both parties are serious about a long-term commitment, they should be able to hammer this out. And you can even look at it, the fact that they let both of these guys walk, maybe that's Edmonton kind of saying, we feel good that Draisaitl's going to return. We're going to need that money eventually, and that's why we're letting them walk out the door. Like, you could also look at what they did today. not bringing in Broberg and not bringing in Holloway and saving themselves, what's it, like $7 million combined between the two? I mean, that's money that they are allotting to Draisaitl already.
It's a shot to the Oilers' future, for sure. Like, not knowing what these guys are going to look like, and they're going to maybe flourish under someone else's roof. You'll have to live with that. But at the end of the day, it's like the Oilers are going to make changes to the group as the season goes on. They're going to need to be active at the deadline to some certain extent. They have to have some flexibility, and ultimately this gives them the flexibility, as much as it is a shame that you won't see Broberg and Holloway flourish under your roof.
Which is also nice. We'll see. They've got a little bit of cap space. There's a chance that they could end up using it, then they'll have to get into LTIR. But if they don't, and they roll with like Emberson and Troy Stetcher, and they don't bring someone in or get a PTO who's making a little bit more money, they could accrue cap space throughout the season and not have to put Kane on LTIR.
Bottom line,
as of now,
they need a defenseman. A lot of teams could say that, so they're not any worse off that way. I mean, obviously there's 2 departures there, but the problem is not insurmountable. This is Broberg, by the way, just before we break, on becoming a member of the St. Louis Blues.
Darren made me prepare that this could happen, and I'm very excited that I'm in blue, and I'm looking forward to it. It's been wild, I'm very excited to be a blue, and I'm very looking forward to meeting everybody and getting to know the staff and everybody and the teammates, and I'm just excited.
So here we are, August 20th. Plenty to talk about hockey-wise. It's exciting, isn't it?
It is nice. But you talk about one person who's going to be under a lot of scrutiny out of all of this. I mean, if he does not develop into the player that obviously St. Louis is hoping for, that fan base is going to look at that and say, how did you pay this guy that much money?
That's a 2-year deal. They took a chance.
But like, think about how Carolina was talked about with the Kotkaniemi deal. If this doesn't turn out, it's a very similar kind of set of circumstances.
St. Louis has an interesting blue line. It's got some age on it, so we'll see. Coming up next, we'll go into a few things, but later on at 5 o'clock, confirm or deny. This is OverDrive on TSN 4, TSN 1050, the iHeartRadio app, and streaming online. Oh, yes, guy. OverDrive. Jim Tatti and Frankie Corrado and Mike DiStefano, a.k.a. Al's brother. OverDrive is brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. So the Argos are getting set to host Saskatchewan on Thursday night. Chad Kelly will start, and Chad did speak and offered up this apology. Let's listen.
I'm sorry for my actions. I'm sorry for what I did. I affected a lot of people, my teammates, my coaches, women, my family. I feel bad for the situation that happened. I've grown, I've learned from, not only the past couple months, but, every day I'm trying to get better, be a better person, better teammate, better male. I have to own up to my mistakes, and I know what I did wrong, and I've learned from it. I've done more than what is being asked for me because I want to get it right. I want to make sure everybody believes that, I'm never going to do something like this again. But, I know I affected a lot of people, including, the person. So, I just want everybody to know that, I'm sorry, and I will be better, and I'll be a better teammate and person from this.
Well, he covered all the ground there, that's for sure.
Sure. Undeniable talent.
Yep.
I mean, at one point had NFL aspirations and didn't work there for a number of reasons. Some of them, disciplinary. Comes to the CFL and gets an opportunity, does a great job, gets himself in trouble again. This is it. Like there's no more chances. This is the last chance.
Yep.
There's no more chances after this. And I'm sure he's on close watch with the Argos and the CFL and everyone involved as he should be.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, quite literally. Was it the last chance clause?
Yeah.
Which was kind of enacted here. So, yeah, look, he's been given multiple chances throughout his career, right? There's been a couple issues down south, as you alluded to, and now we got this issue here. I think, or I hope that this truly is like the final, I don't know if you want to call it a outburst or whatever you want to call it, that what he just said right now, he means it.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's time for him to learn his lessons.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to struggle as much, though, going into tomorrow. Because there's a lot of conversation about Chad Kelly going into tomorrow's game, whether or not they should start him. because of last week you saw with Nathan Rourke.
Yeah, well, that was a Sunday night thing, and on Monday that was pretty fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll struggle as much, though.
You would hope not. Although, we don't know the extent of what he was doing to keep sharp. Nathan Rourke's a different story. He's got like 4 playbooks in his head and a couple of time zones.
Yeah,
and a different game. Like
Yeah.
he was
Completely different game.
playing a
one less
different
down
game.
and a lot wider field. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's different. Like he's been with the Argos, their playbook, their practices, their facilities. Nathan Rourke was everywhere, and he was trying to pursue an NFL dream. And then you thrust him into a game like that. That's a tough situation.
Yeah, it's sort of there's a lot of narratives that just sort of happen because that's how we talk. But the reality is those are 2 different situations.
Yeah, and Nathan Rourke, that one game, that'll be a one-off.
I think so.
Like
He'll be fine.
he is.
That's rust.
He's way too skilled, way too talented, way too good. At the CFL level, which we saw the last time he was playing here. He was doing stuff that hadn't really been done before, especially from a Canadian quarterback. So
odds-on favorite to win the MOP the year that he got hurt, and nearly won it too after missing the final half of the season. Was still very much in contention.
And you know what? That's a good point, though, Al's brother. Like, he did get hurt. And we talked to Naylor yesterday about that. Like, string together a year where you're healthy, too.
Yeah.
See what that looks like.
Well,
that'll be important for him.
It would have been since college that he's strung together a full season for Rourke. And you're looking at 3-4 years ago now.
And the best the best quarterbacks in the NFL, what's one thing that's, synonymous with them? They're durable and they're available.
Yeah.
Right? Well, all the best guys were always very available. How many times did Brady's backup, whoever it was, play? How many times did Peyton Manning's backup play? Like, go down the list.
Yeah, really.
Those guys were always there and always available.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So his next stop is Ottawa on Saturday night, BC at Ottawa. Interesting to see what happens in that game.
I think he'll rebound.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I think he'll rebound for sure.
Ottawa's got a good defense, real test there. So we sort of wrapped up the hockey. And I did throw those numbers at you to confuse you off the top.
Jimmy, when teachers used to tell you back in the day, I don't know if you ever got this.
I never listened.
Yeah, I could tell.
I was preoccupied.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to carry a calculator around with you for the rest of your life. This situation today, I needed a calculator right off the top of the show.
You got one right
my
here.
line was quite simple, I'm going to be a sportscaster. I don't need some of this stuff.
When did you know you were going to be a sportscaster?
Grade 10. Did
you start holding court in the cafeteria, hosting a show?
Yeah, pretty well.
Come talk to the tap man. Let's talk about the Leafs.
Oh, we would argue. We would argue about stuff, but I knew quite early, and I knew what I needed, and I knew what I didn't need, which is kind of important if you're well defined.
Yes, guy.
There you go.
Is that when you started growing the mustache?
A couple years before.
Okay, so the mustache came first, and then the sportscaster aspirations.
When's the last time you shaved that off? How long's it been, Tatti?
Oh, I shaved it off in COVID. Nobody saw it.
Really?
Yeah. Nobody saw it.
Really?
Yeah.
What made you want to do that?
Why not?
Everyone else
grew a beard, and then all of a sudden you're shaving
it the other way.
Some people were growing handlebars, and you said, I'm going to shave this mustache.
Took it off. Yeah, absolutely.
Was it cold?
No.
Was it discolored underneath?
It looked like it was still there. Well, that's why I grew it back. Well, I can still see it, so we'll just leave it.
So you can't call it original anymore.
No. Well, it's not original anyways because you cut it. So the original hair
Dude, could you imagine if you had done zero?
Oh, Lanny McDonald times 100.
That?
Lanny times 100.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's original hair, I believe.
Oh, that has to be. But that also must get like the oil treatment, the like special shampoo treatment.
I've often wanted to do a podcast having soup with Lanny McDonald.
Do you take a lot of pride in the fact that you can eat soup and watery ice cream and not get any on your mustache?
I don't put a lot of thought into things like that. I don't. It's just whatever.
I've sent you a picture of a guy with a mustache once, and I said, Jimmy, this kind of looks like you. And you said, wait a second, I can eat soup. That guy can't.
That's right. He was too thick. All right. We still have 3 minutes to kill.
Well,
hey,
so coming up. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of, we were talking about all the numbers, needing a calculator, all the deals. Matty Beniers signed a big fat contract just before we came to air.
But 7 years, not 8 years. It's 7.143.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that be 8?
Well, that's a good question.
I don't know. I don't know why it wouldn't be 8, but I think that's right where he should be. Like at
7.1.
You think?
Sure. After his
entry level, sure.
after his rookie year, like myself and probably some others thought this guy was going to take a step as far as being one of the top 50 players in the NHL.
But he didn't. He took
didn't.
a step, but it was backward, not forward.
He took a step back, but I would imagine with the skill set there, they're banking on him being worth every penny. And in the long run, when the cap is $105 million and he's making $7 million, that might be a good bet.
Well, you hope if you're the team that's by the end of that deal, it's a steal, and it probably will be.
Would they draft him second overall, Al's brother?
Second overall in 2021. He went from 24 goals, 57 points in his rookie season. He did play the year before, 10 games after Michigan. We had 9 points in 10 games. First full year, 57 points in 80 games, then dropped off last year. Just 15 goals, 37 points, 77 games. So,
and did he win the
20-point drop off?
Did he win the Calder?
I believe
the rookie of the year.
Yeah, I believe he did. Yep, he won the Calder that year season as well.
I'll bet on that skill. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely, every day.
Yeah,
it's just you could have went into next year. All right, let's see if he can get back to that.
Would you get him for $6 million? Like, let's say he didn't have a good year. Like, would you be happy getting him for $6 million
for a 1-year deal?
No, not a 1-year deal, but like, you know what I mean? Like, you want to take care of that business before you kind of affect maybe what he's going to look like next year.
Well, what if he goes into next year and he only puts up 43 points?
Then you have some questions and concerns.
Gotta
go.
go.
You want to wait?
Confirm or deny is next. OverDrive continues on TSN 1050, TSN 4, the iHeartRadio app, and streaming online.